It struck me this week as I was getting ready for this that it's, Roger, you probably would identify with this. Government. They set the calendar of our lives with taxes. They tell us where to go with registration. They send out police and soldiers to guide our way to make sure that we do what they want us to do. Because Caesar Augustus wants to know how much his empire can produce in revenue. He's the first one to have that idea that you can actually know what your GNP is. How many of us have stopped to think that in that very first little line about that Caesar Augustus decrees that the whole world will be registered, what chaos that caused for everyone? If I had to do that today, I wouldn't be here. I would be on my way to Portland, Oregon. And I wonder how many more of us would be on our way at some distance to be registered. So this story is not so gentle, meek, and mild as we might think. It's disruptive and chaotic. It's a hardship for Mary and Joseph. The trip from Nazareth, if we suppose that Joseph is an established carpenter in Nazareth at the time that he is engaged to Mary, if we make that leap of faith and judgment, Nazareth is about 80 miles from Bethlehem. Now that's not very far by our reckoning. That's a little bit further. I mean, it's not quite as far as it is from here to Harrisonburg. But it's far enough. I'm sure if we were doing this at the time that this church was founded, they would think that 80 miles was a pretty far piece. And in the time of Christ, 80 miles would have been somewhere between 4 days and a week's journey. With all of those people moving around to get to the place where they needed to be registered, there surely would have been caravans that they could have joined and be a part of as they made that trek. But once you get to be part of a caravan, as anyone who has ever been near the Boy Scouts or the Army or any other large group of people going anywhere, once you get more than 3 people together, it always takes longer. So Mary is on a donkey, perhaps. Joseph is walking. And so the good news is that with all this chaos and with all of these people moving around and all these folks headed to Bethlehem, the good news is they won't be by themselves and therefore won't be vulnerable to bandits on the road. But by the same token, the bad news is because so many people are traveling there would have been a premium on food and shelter. And not much of it. It occurs to me that the closest that we get to that is the traveling that we do at the holidays, where the primary story for Christmas Eve or for Thanksgiving or for New Year's is who got stuck where. And they show pictures of people trying to sleep or rest on those uncomfortable airport seats and the bus station seats. I discovered in Amsterdam once why it is that they make those seats so uncomfortable. Because if they were comfortable, we would lie down on them. And instead of taking up 1 seat, we would take up 4 or 5. We all know the next piece of this story. That when they finally get there is no room at the inn. So they end up in a stable, or what probably would be better for us to say now, in an unheated garage. And then the baby arrives. What is it about a baby that makes us melt like ice in July and turn into inept fools? A famous British poet once said that God made babies cute so they could survive the years of dependence on their adults, who are notoriously bad at doing the right thing and putting up with children. Because, he said, adults can be so self-centered. Only a baby could get someone's attention to do the right thing. I'm convinced that it is our potential that we have for love that makes us decent human beings around children and especially around babies. And that love comes directly from God. Not the kind of romantic, I love you, I want to spend the rest of my life with you kind of love. Indeed, anyone who's had children knows that that's not the kind of love that you have for children. The kind of love you have for children is the one that is, I love you and I'm going to be your parent until I die, and I hope I go first. The kind of love that opens us up and makes us want to sacrifice, not just for our own children, but for others. While hope may be the strong force that binds things together, love is the energy that makes things happen. And now for the story. And this is a true story, so you'll forgive me if I get a little verklempt, as they say. 8 years ago now, there was a disaster in the Gulf. And Baton Rouge, Louisiana, grew from a small little burg of 60,000 people to 360,000 people in 1 week. Trips across town that took 5 minutes now took an hour and a half. The place was completely packed. There was a group of disaster responders who were staying, well, actually, there were tens of thousands of disaster responders who were staying in every hotel room, some 4 and 5 to a room, in any vacant space that they could find. And into this midst comes a young man and his wife who is very pregnant. And they arrive, of course, on Christmas Eve. They were evacuees from New Orleans. Their temporary housing had been condemned. And so they were forced to leave and go to New Orleans. Of course, their credit cards didn't work. And of course, they had only enough cash to pay for gas and a few things to eat along the way. A trip from New Orleans to Baton Rouge that normally took 90 minutes took them 8 hours. And they come exhausted, dirty, hungry, with only the clothes on their backs, and arrive at the desk of a hotel. And they look at the clerk. And the young man has a pleading look on his face. Are there any rooms? He asks. We are tired. My wife is expecting any day now. And all we want is a place to stay for just one night so that we can get a night's sleep and a shower. There's stuff stacked around the lobby of the hotel from all of the responders who have parked there semi-permanently. The breakfast room is full of people. Even though it's late on Christmas Eve, it is full of people wearing different colored shirts, signifying who they work with. The hotel clerk shuffles his feet and looks down at his occupancy map. Every room is paid for. And just as he is about to turn them away, he thinks to check, has everyone actually checked in? And he turns to the man and he says, tonight, sir, is your lucky night. We have one room which has not been filled. The poor boy is crestfallen, and he looks almost trembling. I don't have enough money to pay for the room. Whereupon the clerk smiles again and says, that's not your problem, sir. This room's already paid for. And it's a double king. He slid the key across the counter with the number on the folder across saying, I'm really not supposed to do this, but it's Christmas Eve. The man looked back with anxious eyes, and the clerk smiled and said, go ahead, go to bed. About midnight, the clerk could hear a lot of crying coming from that room, even through the sound-dampened walls and the acoustic carpet. So he goes to the door and he listens, and he can hear the absolutely clear bell of a woman in labor. And he knocks on the door. Is everything all right? Reminding one of the guy in the Canterbury Jails who was the champion of the obvious at every turn. Of course, not everything was right. The man answered through the distance of the room and the floor and said, I'm so sorry. I apologize. My wife has gone into labor. Can you call someone? Gotcha covered, answered the clerk. He called 911 from his cell phone and camped outside the door until they got here. It was a miracle in itself that the 911 call was answered and that there was someone to come, because after all, everything was in chaos in those days. The cell phone systems had been down for weeks, and even now the calls were only sporadic. The paramedics came, and the baby was born just about daybreak. They cleaned up the baby in the bathroom and wrapped him in a thermal blanket from the ambulance and brought him back to his mother. He turned and spoke to the father. I don't know how to tell you this, sir. I am so sorry, but we have another call. There's a pileup on the interstate, and we have to leave immediately. It looks bad. I need to ask you, can you take her and the baby to the hospital to have them checked over? They both look fine, but just to be safe, you know, here is an admitting form. There won't be any trouble. It was about 9 in the morning when the paramedics left. The room was strewn with debris. The packages that everything had come in, from gauze to IV drips. By that time, the day shift was there for the hotel. The supervisor of the maids came by. She was not known as a cool, laid-back sort of person. And everyone sort of flinched to see what was going to happen next. When she looks in the room, she looks around. And she looks at everyone there and she says, "You have left this woman on soiled sheets all night? You go get sheets. You go get a mop. You go get the steam cleaner. You go get some food. You go get some diapers." She was like a general taking command of the field. Everyone stood there with their mouths agape. This was the woman who you didn't even drop a candy wrapper on the floor without feeling guilty. The day clerk just stood back and watched. The night clerk was still there watching with his head sort of stuck around the corner, wrapped in the attention at the people who the night before could only grumble and complain, who were now jostling with one another to be able to get just a glimpse of this baby. They started to ask what they could do to help. Well, the family left to go to the hospital, and everyone in the place saw them off. And a few hours later, they came back carrying a new car seat, more diapers, more baby things, not knowing what to expect when they got back to the hotel. When they arrived, the manager, the big boss, was standing by the door, and the young man didn't know what to expect. And the manager stood there and then stepped forward and shook the young man's hand and said, "We're so glad that you're here. You can stay here as long as you need to. Don't worry about a thing." Because you see, the people who had been in that lobby the night before had gone around and collected up money and collected up stuff and gone to the management and said, "We need to make sure that they're taken care of." A little baby brought a whole hotel of strangers together that night and gave them the gift of love for a child they would only know for a day, and the ability to get outside themselves, outside of their normally crusty, difficult selves, to embrace this little baby. Love, that deep relationship with God and one another, is what connects us to our better selves and gives us the courage to live for others. Yes, God so loved the world that He gave His only Son and gave us love that we might have the energy and the foresight to enjoy this life, even when it is hard. My prayer for every one of you is that this Christmas you will experience that infusing, electrifying, energizing love that those folks, those strangers thrown together in that hotel room, felt as they marveled at this little baby that had come to them unbidden, without resource, with nothing to offer, and gave them the most precious gift of Christmas that they will ever receive, and no one will ever forget. Merry Christmas. And now let me give you this challenge. Go out into the world and discover God's love. Find it in one another. Find it in the dark places. And if you can't find it, then ignite it. Shine the light into the darkness and share what love you have with others. For even sometimes when we think nothing to give, it is that very gift of presence and caring which are the most needful. And now go out into the world in peace and be of good courage and know that God watches over you, that Christ walks before you, and the Spirit of God will strengthen you. Amen.